Good, I'm good, thanks.
Brilliant, brilliant. We should be live, we should be all set, and StreamYard should be doing us good. So hopefully you can hear me fine.
I can hear you well. Hopefully you hear me well as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So we are streaming live on LinkedIn and YouTube. People will come in, people will come out, people will listen to the recording as well. But if there are anybody listening on either of those platforms, feel free to chuck a question in the box for either myself or Sebastian, and we'll be happy to answer. But it's good to catch up with you. I remember when we first spoke, 18 months ago, perhaps, first about Kubermatic and Kubernetes and, Ludes back then. So it's been a long time, hasn't it?
Yeah, quite a long time and quite interesting ride. I mean, even the last 2 years with COVID, really interesting challenges, how the whole industry evolved. Everyone now used to working remotely and working from home.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get into that. We'll get into remote working. We'll get into the rocket ship that is Kubermatic. People would formerly know your company as Ludes, but it's great to have you on today. And this is a different conversation to the one you and I had before, where we was talking more about, I think, if my memory serves me right, the recent meetup that CNCF hosted. So this is more about you, the business, and for people to be able to get to know a bit about Kubermatic. So do you want to just jump straight in and tell us who you are and who the business is?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let me start introducing myself. I'm Sebastian, one of the two founders of Kubermatic. My background, have an engineering or computer science background. Was then working, starting at SAP, different areas. First in the professional services. Not really in the infrastructure space, was implementing ERP and CRM solutions, like more business software, and working there with big clients, improving their processes, was implementing the SAP side. Inside of SAP, then I wanted to get more technical, and at that time, a new ship was coming up in SAP called HANA, the database. In-memory database, and I joined that team and was working there and get also more involved into like infrastructure. Was really like on the database side, it was much more technical, and yeah, it was really interesting. And so I wanted to continue the journey. And at that time, Docker came popular, and I said, okay, after 7 years, potentially it's time to do something else. And so I decided to leave the SAP and started working a bit with Docker as freelancer. And when Google announced Kubernetes, I said to my co-founder Julian, "Hey, that's really interesting. Let's do something with it." Not sure yet what problem or what we can do with it exactly. But I think there is a huge opportunity, especially for the enterprises. And let's build a product company around this. And so yeah, we started working with, I think, Kubernetes 6.5 years ago. Started Kubermatic officially 5.5 years ago, roughly. And yeah, I really saw there quite fast the problem: how do you manage all this cloud native infrastructure and Kubernetes? And so yeah, then we really started building a product around this, how you can manage Kubernetes cluster at scale. Our goal was every time, okay, we not only want to manage 1 or 2 clusters, we really wanted to manage hundreds or even thousands of clusters at scale. And yeah, building the company, the first years bootstrapped, and since last year also decided getting venture capital in to grow faster.
Do you know, everything you just said there is very interesting, and it reminds me when you mentioned about 7 years ago when you went into freelancing and you started exploring Docker as well. It reminded me, did you see the Kubernetes documentary that Honeypot did recently?
Yeah, partly. Really interesting, and yeah, a lot of topics were like, oh yeah, this somehow rings some bells. I know a lot of the people who are involved there personally as well. So yeah, we're also looking to get like conferences again to meet a lot of them again in person. And yeah, it was really interesting to involve. I mean, there was also some news stories I didn't know before, and was really interesting also to reflect a bit like, okay, how was the last 7 years on our side, and how we involved over the time.
Yeah, it's such an interesting documentary, isn't it? Because it takes it right back to the roots. And I spoke about this on my podcast last week with somebody actually. And it's amazing if you think about how Kubernetes almost never got off the ground if it wasn't for everybody coming together and believing that it should be an open source project, and Docker and the Kubernetes war at the start, and then Amazon not really being interested. So it was such an interesting documentary. Took it right back to its roots.
Yeah, I mean, that was like when we started one of the big discussions. Okay, what's the right container orchestration solution? At that time, there was Mesos, which was already quite popular. Docker was pushing for Docker Swarm, and then yeah, Kubernetes came up, and was new. Summer news time, there was like, okay, what direction will it be? And it was also interesting, like how fast the whole market then later changed in direction like to cloud native, and this I didn't expect.
Absolutely.
It will such a big change. I mean, I liked the idea from Docker from the beginning on, really this packaging everything together, get rid of this dependency problems and things like this, but that will change everything so fast. It was also like I didn't expect that at all.
Yeah, it just took off like a rocket ship. It was crazy. But Sebastian, coming back to you then. So at the start, you said you're one of the co-founders, you and Julian. So what I'd be interested to know is, what does the role of CEO and a co-founder of a successful startup look like? What's your day-to-day?
Yeah, so my role is on the one side, because I have the technical background, be responsible for the whole product development together with my team, driving that direction, and working on the general strategy. Where do we want to go with the product, but also where do we see market opportunities? What are markets we want to concentrate on? And Julian is mainly focusing on the whole sales. Of course, we're working there closely hand in hand. What he sees with customers, so that we have a clear, defined strategy, and it's also like more and more adjusting our like, for example, customer profiles where we're targeting, so that we getting there more traction, and like growing the organization. Also think about, okay, when it's the right time to potentially restructure some stuff. Okay, when do we need in some areas like team leads or managers taking over, and yeah, keeping all the things rolling and forward. And of course, one of the important things is also ensure that we have every time the financial background.
So you're the guy that comes with the technical and the software background, and Julian's background, is he more sales and architecture then?
Yeah, he's more the focusing, or he's fully focusing on the sales side, running our whole sales organization. And I mean, the good thing, what I learned during my time at SAP, as implementing like ERP or CM systems, I was implementing like sales software and also marketing software. Like, I know roughly how the processes are working there. Not like that I was like running the processes itself, but as I was every time like in contact with the business there, and like then try to implement this, I have a quite good broad understanding how an organization runs and is organized. So helping on that side, and now having like a whole management team who's taking part more and more about specific topics, having someone who's taking care about our financial side, with Dirk, Anna, who's taking care of general operations, Sasha, who's my general product leader. So establishing there a whole organization that we have every time the right knowledge and the right capacity to further grow.
Okay, so this would be a good question for you then, in terms of you being the tech guy, having a software background. How are developers today consuming Kubernetes? Because the rate of adoption is ridiculous. So how are developers consuming Kubernetes?
Yeah, I think first of all, there is no like one developers. So I think it's a different, broader range of developers. So for example, if I'm talking to my developers who are much more used to infrastructure, they definitely use Kubernetes in a complete different way than front end or normal backend developers who are deploying applications to Kubernetes. And so I think it really depends on what use case you are in. I think what we're seeing is more and more, and that's that Kubernetes is a platform to build platforms on top of it, and that plain Kubernetes in a lot of cases requires a quite deep knowledge, and there needs to be abstraction layers for example, front-end or back-end developers, because as a normal or as a back-end or front-end developer, you really want to concentrate on your business requirements, on your application requirements, and potentially don't dig so deep into like what is a plumbing code, how do I get everything there deeply in the orchestration layer together. And I think that's why also some frameworks are on top getting so popular, because it's the learning curve to start with Kubernetes, I would say, is not every time the easiest one. It takes some time, especially if you're not used to cloud native at all and coming more from a monolithic side. So first of all, understanding the concept of microservices, then container, what's an image, what's a container, and then the whole complexity around Kubernetes with like pods and services and all this kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it's a complex world, isn't it? I think when I talk to entry-level engineers coming into the software world, they kind of get overwhelmed a little bit with Kubernetes because it's still relatively new. It's been around and people have their own definitions of it, and it's widely used and it's an open source tool, but it's still relatively new for a lot of people. So the complexity behind it, I think it takes quite a lot of time for people to upskill in it, unless they're coming into an environment like Kubermatic or another business where there are experts in the business, there's SMEs, and you can learn on the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the learning curve is quite hard at the beginning, and as it is a distributed system, and also the application is distributed, typically it's a lot easier to write a monolithic application. It's much easier to debug, much easier to find issues. But if your system is like distributed, a lot of things happens on the networking, and you really need to understand quite good how the whole networking is working. And so this Kubernetes brings a lot of flexibility and scale, but it brings also more complexity because it's more distributed and it's more more things you need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So on this subject then, could you just, for a couple of minutes, discuss the alternatives to Kubernetes? So building your own API or business case, for example?
I think it really depends on the use cases. I think Kubernetes is not the solution for every problem. So I think first of all, there are plenty of use cases where it's still enough to start an individual VM or only use a single VM with only containers. So it really depends on what are your requirements, how much high availability do I need, how much scale do I need, and how long do I can, for example, survive an outage into this. And of course, everyone wants to, in best case, every time have like 99.999 or 100% high availability, but typically this brings then a lot of complexity in this architecture. And besides Kubernetes, as I said, there are platforms on top. It starts with that on the cloud providers, you have the serverless components you can start, where like internally They use containers, sometimes also Kubernetes in this, or that you can deploy components or, for example, serverless frameworks on top of Kubernetes, which makes some things easier, or even using plain Docker containers for simple applications.
So I wanted to talk to you about edge computing and how that works with Kubernetes, the benefits. But before you go into that, could you just give a quick overview or a quick definition of edge computing?
Yeah, of course, and I think that's really important. I mean, it really depends on the company how they're seeing it. Like for us, the edge case is mostly running decent hardware in a data center or on a, for example, fabric or in a location. So there's a definition between near edge and far edge. You have, for example, some workloads in your cloud or in your big data center, but then the first edge could be a smaller data center or a few servers you have in your fabric or in a specific office location. Then the next step could be, for example, when we're looking into the telco space, you're running some hardwares at the towers. Like all of these use cases typically have decent power supply and connectivity, but then you have also this far edge use case, so where you have devices, IoT devices, or other devices, for example, running some compute on a truck or things like this, where the device is roaming between networks, things like this, and where you cannot guarantee that you have every time connectivity or every time power supply. So on these cases, you have different use cases, but I think there's one common a problem, or what every of these use cases needs to solve, is how I do manage my software lifecycle, because we see it also with like your IoT devices at home, like cameras and things which are connected to the internet. Like 5 years ago, or nobody cared about really how do I update these devices. But as they now are used much more for example, DDoS attacks and things like this, how do you update these devices? And one possibility can, of course, be let's use containers for this. We have a packaging format. I can easily test this. I can put some devices, but I can also run this test in the cloud, simulate my environment, and then I know how to roll it out and have also an easy way to roll back because I have still my old images and change back to the old images.
Yeah. I think near edge and far edge is something that I've not really heard of before. That's quite an interesting concept. I mean, it makes sense, but it's a new one on me.
There's a definition, I think, from the Linux Foundation about this. I can search for it. I think there's an official image about this, which defines this quite well. And I really like this definition because, it's every time a bit confusing for people, like about what edge you are talking. And so edge is not edge. Similar like IoT is not IoT. There needs to be like more precise definition. Okay, what it is.
I think it's. So I used to recruit for the telecoms industry, and when you think about the advancements since I joined Interquest about 4 years ago with IoT, with connected devices, with AI, ML, with 5G certainly as well, I think Kubernetes is going to have a huge part to play in all of those, edge computing as well.
Absolutely. They are all heavily interested in Kubernetes because when you're looking, for example, in the telco industry, they know rolling out their 5G networks. But one of the biggest challenge is like, how do I operate this as efficient as possible? So to reduce the operational cost there, I think Kubernetes can really play a big role, and having also a streamlined operational model really like from the stuff what they're running in the cloud, from the stuff which they're running in their big data center, up to the stuff they're running at the cell towers. And I think there's still a lot to do because a lot of these things are not containerized yet. And even if like the new stack is completely containerized and working well on Kubernetes, like there will be years where you still need to run your old infrastructure, like your 2G or 3G or 4G network. What's with this? And in best case, you can also get this on the same infrastructure so that you don't need to maintain and operate a similar infrastructure. And I think same is true for enterprises. So at a certain time, in best case, you don't need to operate a lot of different platforms so that you can align and streamline on one platform.
Oh, 2G networks, the old GSM, takes me back, BTS engineers. So, Sebastian, moving more towards the business in particular and away from the tech for a moment, am I right to assume or to say that you have 90 employees in the business?
Yeah, we have roughly currently 90 employees across 24 countries. When we started the company quite early, it was obvious. I'm in Hamburg and Julian is in Hamburg, but as we are working heavily on the open source community, the community was completely distributed. And I mean, the talents on this who really like deep experts of Kubernetes are still rare, but at that time even more. And so we said, okay, we had someone applied from Poland, and we said, okay, yeah, we definitely want to get him on board because he's already upstream working on Kubernetes. But potentially we cannot convince him to come to Hamburg. And so we said, okay, why not? We're working completely in a remote open source project with Kubernetes. Why not focusing our organization in that matter as well? And so in general, how we build up our organization, like communication, there's a lot of things you will see also in cloud native or Kubernetes. So we have special interest groups where people joining together in working on specific topics, things like that. And yeah, it's working well with the people across all the countries. I think the biggest challenge is time zone. Like still the majority of our stuff is plus minus European time zone, so plus minus 3-4 hours. But the good thing is, like when we started and before COVID times, it was a lot of customers didn't understand the remote concept. Now, even like all the big ones, it's not a question that they come to remote meetings and things like this. So there, a lot of things changed and helped to make our life at that thing much easier.
Interesting one, 90 employees across 24 countries. How many of your employees have you met in person?
Good question. I didn't count it, but I mean, what we try to do is meeting on a regular basis. This was also true before Corona. There we like try to do it on a quarterly basis. Now with COVID, it's much more difficult. I had the last meeting in September. We'll do the next one. Sorry, it's quite windy here. We had the next meeting or meeting before also, roughly the September the year before. And yeah, there were people like working 1.5 years for us, and I met them then in person. And I think there are people I never met in person, or there are definitely people in the organization I never met in person, and also who are working longer for us I never met in person. And yeah, we hope now this year, at least in the summer, everything gets a little bit more normal, that we can meet more regular again, because I think even in a remote organization, it's really sometimes important that you can meet and drinking a coffee, drinking a beer, or chat also, not like only on a specific topic and like, okay, we have a meeting, let's just discuss this topic next meeting, so that you then taking some time and say, hey, what's going on? Let's talk about random technology, or what about family? Any kind of those questions.
Well, KubeCon's coming up in May, isn't it, in Spain? So that could be a good meeting place for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really looking forward for KubeCon. Also, like meeting a lot of people from the community again, since like didn't met them since 2 years. So really looking forward to this, and we are also now planning internally getting in summer some get-togethers more regular, so that our people can share also or meet and share the knowledge in person.
I see that Kubermatic is sponsoring KubeCon, aren't you?
Yeah, I think we're sponsoring more or less. I think besides the China ones, all KubeCons since London. I think the second KubeCon. So we were every time present there. I think it's a really important and interesting event. I think KubeCon shows also like how big this whole cloud native universe now is, because one of the biggest conferences around that space, and it's every time good there to exchange with a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think KubeCon and things like that are invaluable. Just before we move on, somebody's actually posted a question here, and I will show it on the screen for you there.
Yeah, cool. Question is, what's, in my opinion, is the main limitation of microservice architecture?
Yeah,
I think the main reason why you do microservice architecture is not because it's mainly about team structures and how you scale your organization. It's not like the main reason because of the architecture itself. If you're looking, for example, at AWS or Amazon, they, I think, invented this definition of a pizza team, like a team needs to be a size, I think, what 1 or 2 pizzas can feed big pizzas, and it's really like when you grow your organization and get more and more people, how you still be able to deploy and manage like bigger and more complex systems. And I mean, if I would start in a small organization, and I mean, it depends where you want to grow and what's the scalability. But in a lot of cases, I think it's much more easier start with a more monolithic approach, and then carve out the components where you say, okay, I potentially need more scale on this, or I need a different language on this. And instead of saying, okay, let's start really complex immediately with a big microservice architecture, and later you figure out, okay, for our use case, not really required. Why do we invest so much time in this kind of complexity? Because microservice architecture definitely brings a lot of complexity for the design, for the principles, and a lot of things of the microservice architecture you can also apply if you have only one service, so that you, for example, ensure that you log to standard out, and like so things like that. And there it's really careful when to decide, should I do a microservice architecture, or what's also, I mean, a good question is every time, how big is the service? Do I build hundreds of services, or do I build 10, 20 services? And what's a good size of managing this, and not later be too complex that I'm only managing my own complexity.
Yeah, excellent. Taras, thank you very much for posting that. I hope it answered your question. Feel free to throw any more questions in there if you have any. Sebastian, getting back to the business, to Kubermatic, you and I were speaking yesterday, and I pointed out that you've got now over 800 stars on your open source Kubernetes platform, but you very kindly nudged me to say that you've actually got in total over 2,500 stars over all of the repos, and Kube One has 900. So I will post the links to those in the show notes, but do you want to just talk about what that means to you, having 2,500 stars on all your repos?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely good to see that. I mean, on the one side, we're contributing to the CNCF community. Like, we are one of the top contributors to Kubernetes in the last 3 years. I think number 6 or 7 overall to Kubernetes in the last three years. But that we also are able to really push our open source into the community, and that there's adoption to this. And so this makes us really proud, and we really looking for this, and getting their features and functions users are looking for. And there are different tools we have. On the one side, our Kubernetes platform to manage really the big scale, tens, hundreds, or even thousands of clusters. And then like Kube One, which is more like you want to start with individual cluster, and you only want to manage like 2 or 3 clusters. Then it should be really easy to manage this, and potentially you don't need to have the scale. And for us, it's really important. That's also why we decided, I think more or less close to 2 years ago, going even more open source. At that time, only Kube One was open source, but the short form is KKP, Kubernetes platform, was not open source. To decide, okay, let's open source our core product, and change our name from Lutze to Kubermatic, because the name Kubermatic transport much more the ideas and the vision, what we want to do. Really, Kubernetes automation, that we enable developers, operators, and also organization to automate their operation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kubermatic definitely translates more to the business case and the business model in general. Have you seen much of a difference? Just on this subject, has the name change had an impact on the business at all? Are you able to track that?
Absolutely. I mean, yes, people are not confused, because before we had every time the problem, people know Kubernetes but potentially don't know Lutze. So it was every time sometimes confusing who you are. And then we said, Kubernetes, Kubernetes, I heard already, I know you. So that was one of the reasons why we changed this, the name. I mean, there's a background why we choose the name Lutze at that time. It's a lower German word for navigation pilot of a ship. So we said, okay, we are from Hamburg. We're close to containers, real containers. We see container ships. Let's use something in this ecosystem. But we realized, concentrate more on the stronger brand, and the name Lutze is also, for some languages, hard to pronounce. Kubernetes, everyone immediately understands what we're doing, can immediately pronounce it. Let's change this, and definitely helps a lot. We haven't tracked the number that we say, okay, it's X percentages, but we really see it makes our life much easier, and also like moving from the our product there to a more open source product helps also there in a lot of conversations.
Brilliant. And you also shared with me offline an article. So you've actually released Kube One version 1.4 now. So this is your latest version release.
Yeah, exactly. So yesterday was a busy day. So we released Kube One 1.4. I mean, initially, while we built Kube One, we had every time this chicken egg problem. For when we started building our Kubernetes KKP platform, we were thinking, okay, what's the best platform to manage Kubernetes cluster? And we came up, why can't we leverage Kubernetes for this? So technically what we built at that time is like a Kubernetes operator, it's called now. At that time, there was no word for this, but yeah, that's what we built. But the big challenge was then, okay, on every platform we are supporting, the first thing what we need is like the initial Kubernetes cluster, how we do this. And so we stripped out some of the components from KKP and then combined this into Kube1 to manage individual clusters. But now we see also people are using it for complete other use cases so that you, as a developer, you have the problem, you only want to start easily a cluster, and Kube1 is there quite easy, single command line, starts a cluster, and then everything is up and running. So really make it easy, makes the whole lifecycle management of a cluster, upgrading cluster, scaling cluster really easy for an individual cluster. And so a lot of things we develop on the one side on KKP or Kube1 is with the next release going in the other release as well. So for example, we enhanced our capability, what we can do to manage the operating systems, because especially from the enterprise, this feature was coming on a regular basis that they say, hey, I need to install some more components on the operating system. Potentially, I need to have my own logging agent or SSH agent or other things. So first we implemented it in KKP, and with this, it's more or less automatically also implemented in Kube1 because we're leveraging a lot of the same components. And yeah, the last release of KKP was 3 weeks ago, and now it's also in Kube1 available, and you can use this also for individual clusters. Joe, are you still there?
Ah, there we go. Yeah, I think the wind in the UK today is playing havoc with the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, in Hamburg here it's currently also really windy, so could be also here.
I think we've made it work. We've made it work this far. We're ending on a really good point actually, because I have 2 more questions for you that are really interesting. So what does 2022 hold for you personally, and what about what 2022 holds for Kubermatic?
I mean, for personally, I hope I can travel again. After 2 years staying more or less completely home, going a bit more on vacation again, seeing also.
Where do you want to go?
I will go next month going skiing for 1 week, and then I don't have like yet further plans, but definitely travel a bit around. That's for sure. For Kubernetes. Yeah. And yeah, also, I mean, visiting like friends or people which I didn't saw for a longer time because of COVID and all this kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. and for Kubermatic, it's really like our main focus currently is like growing our organization, seeing more and more success on the sales side, and with this also one of the things we want to be more active on even more active on the open source community. So increasing further our adoption, which like also getting more and more GitHub stars. And yeah, if someone hadn't used our product, feel free to use it, and if you like it, please let us know on GitHub. So one of the things we want to cross quite soonish is the 1,000 stars for Kube1 on GitHub, and yeah, that's really where we're looking for.
You're close to that now. You're very close to that now.
Yeah. So hopefully, if you can help us to get this done this month, would be great.
Brilliant. Well, what I would do, like I say, Sebastian, in the show notes, I'll post all of the links to your GitHub, to your blog post, and there'll be links to be able to come back to you as well. So for anybody watching or anybody listening, where can they reach out to you? How's the best way to get hold of you?
I mean, multiple ways. I'm on Twitter. I'm on our Kubermatic community Slack. Feel free to drop me an email, sebastian@kubermatic.com. So, or LinkedIn. Easy to find me there and contact me, and happy to exchange.
Brilliant. Well, Sebastian, like I say, we've made this work with the weather issues and the Wi-Fi issues, but we managed to get to the end. I've really enjoyed this. It's been really informative, and it's great to catch up with you. It's great to hear about the business doing so well, and fingers crossed that this podcast might be able to help you get to 1,000 stars.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, thanks for the opportunity inviting me to the podcast. Really looking forward for doing other formats with you. Every time a pleasure, and yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Fantastic. Well, look, I'm sure we'll keep in touch and we'll catch up soon, but have the rest of a great day and we'll speak soon.
Yeah, speak to you soon. Bye.
Bye. Cheers.